Around 400,000 years ago, in the frigid lands of Europe and Western Asia, an independently evolved human species emerged. Not Homo sapiens, yet clearly not animals either. They were Homo neanderthalensis, commonly known as the Neanderthals. For nearly 300,000 years, Neanderthals survived and thrived in harsh ecological conditions, primarily across Western and Central Europe, the Near East, and parts of Asia. They were humans adapted to the Ice Age: short, robust bodies, thick bones, broad chests, and large noses, anatomical traits that helped conserve heat and absorb oxygen efficiently. No evidence of writing, no lasting architecture. Yet they left behind stone tools, hearths, campsite remains, and animal bones bearing cut marks, evidence of a species capable of crafting, cooperating, and organizing their living spaces. The first Neanderthal remains were discovered in 1856 in Germany's Neander Valley. At the time, they were dismissed as prehistoric brutes. But today, thanks to advancements in archaeology and genetics, our perspective has shifted. They are no longer caricatures of savagery. They are a branch of the Homo genus, sharing a common ancestor with modern humans, and even interbreeding with Homo sapiens. Neanderthals are not just fossil relics. They were a true human species with their own story. And to understand modern humans, we must understand them. The question is no longer who were they, but do they still live within us? And the answer, in part, is yes. Part 2. Where did they come from? Neanderthals did not appear suddenly. They were the product of a long evolutionary lineage stretching back millions of years, beginning in Africa, the cradle of the Homo genus. Around 3 million years ago, from ape-like ancestors such as Australopithecus, the Homo genus emerged. The first species with distinctly human traits was Homo habilis, living about 2.5 million years ago, nicknamed the handyman for its ability to craft basic stone tools. Then came Homo erectus, a significant leap forward, taller, fire-using, hunting-capable, and the first human species to migrate out of Africa. In Europe and Western Asia, descendants of Homo erectus gradually adapted to the colder climates and new environments. Around 700,000 years ago, an intermediate species appeared, Homo heidelbergensis, the direct ancestor of Neanderthals. As glaciation expanded across Europe, populations of heidelbergensis became biologically isolated. Over hundreds of thousands of years, they accumulated adaptations to cold climates, stocky bodies, large noses, dense bones. This process eventually gave rise to Homo neanderthalensis. Meanwhile, in Africa, another heidelbergensis lineage evolved in a different direction. Around 300,000 years ago, they became Homo sapiens, modern humans. Neanderthals and sapiens were therefore parallel lineages, evolving from a shared ancestor. They were not our predecessors, but close cousins. And for tens of thousands of years, both species coexisted, until destiny brought them face to face in Europe, opening a new chapter in the human saga. Part 3. A harsh life. Neanderthals did not build cities. They had no agriculture. They did not store food on a large scale. They were nomads, living entirely by hunting and gathering. Their migration cycles depended on the seasons, food availability, and the movements of large animals. Campsites were strategically chosen, near rivers, in low valleys, or at the edges of forests and grasslands, where wildlife commonly passed through. At their dwellings, there's clear evidence of spatial organization. Hearths were centralized. Animal bones, stone tools, and debris were discarded in designated areas. Sleeping spaces were separated from food processing zones. This spatial pattern is consistent across sites like Lazaret Cave in France and Abric Romani in Spain. Group sizes were small, usually 15 to 30 individuals. Based on extensive surveys of settlement sites, the estimated peak Neanderthal population density in Europe was just 0.02 individuals per square kilometer, roughly 1 person per 50 square kilometers. Interactions between groups were rare but crucial. Such encounters likely involved tool exchanges, the spread of new techniques, mating opportunities, and strengthening genetic diversity, critical to avoiding inbreeding. There was no long-term food storage, no modern medicine, no support systems beyond the immediate community. Neanderthals relied on one another, sharing food, caring for children, protecting the elderly to survive each winter. In such unforgiving conditions, survival wasn't an individual effort. It was the result of sustainable cooperation within small, close-knit groups. Art 4. The art of the hunt. Neanderthals were effective hunters despite lacking bows, mechanical traps, or advanced ranged weapons. Their main weapon was the wooden spear, 2 to 3 meters long, sometimes sharpened, tipped with stone, and hardened by fire. Some spears were intricately carved for better balance when thrown. Their hunting strategies relied on deep ecological knowledge. Neanderthals tracked footprints, analyzed dung, understood animal movement patterns and migration cycles. They chose ambush points carefully, exploiting terrain features like ravines, marshes, and cliffs, places where prey could be trapped or cornered. At sites such as Le Côte de Saint-Brelade, UK, and Moron, France, archaeological evidence reveals large-scale coordinated hunts. Dozens of bison killed at once, suggesting complex group tactics. Prey was not just meat. Flesh provided energy, fat ensured calories during the winter, bone marrow offered nutrition. Hides became insulating garments, and bones were used as tools or fuel when wood was scarce. Nothing was wasted. Beyond large animals like mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and bison, Neanderthals also hunted deer, wild boar, and hares. In coastal areas like Gibraltar, they fished, collected shellfish, crabs, and even harvested seabirds. Their strategies adapted to their environments: big game hunting on grasslands, stalking small animals in forests, trapping fish, or foraging mollusks by rivers. Each region had its own hunting model, demonstrating local technical adaptation. All this proves hunting for Neanderthals was not mere instinct. It was a strategic activity requiring knowledge, coordination, and cooperation, comparable to any modern hunting culture ever documented. Part 5. Tools of survival. Tools were critical to Neanderthal survival. Contrary to outdated notions of random stone banging, Neanderthals employed a sophisticated and systematic method known as the Lavalios technique. This approach involved shaping a stone core in order to produce thin, sharp, uniform flakes, ideal for reuse and combination with other materials. Lavalios was not simple. It required abstract thinking, surface preparation, precise detachment points, and the ability to anticipate the final shape of the product. Controlling angles, fracture direction, and impact force reveals an understanding of experimental physics far beyond mere instinct. Neanderthals also used composite materials. They combined stone, wood, and adhesives, typically plant resin or beeswax, to make hybrid tools. At the Königsau site, Germany, researchers found tools with traces of resin, clear evidence of natural glue used to affix stone tips to wooden handles. One of the most remarkable discoveries was the set of wooden spears from Schöningen, Germany, over 300,000 years old. These spears were finely carved, front-weighted, and clearly designed for throwing. Modern tests show they could reach distances of over 20 meters, comparable to modern throwing weapons. Besides stone, Neanderthals used wood, bone, antler, and even rope. A triple-twisted plant fiber found at Abri-du-Marais, France, indicates they could make cordage, opening possibilities for binding, carrying, hauling, and crafting complex tools. There was no industry, no machines, but with stone, wood, fire, and acute observation, Neanderthals developed a technological system sufficient to endure the harshest survival conditions of the Ice Age for hundreds of thousands of years. Part 6. Armor against the cold. Europe's Pleistocene climate was not survivable without body protection. Winter temperatures could plunge below -30 degrees Celsius, with dry winds and year-round snow in many regions. Neanderthals couldn't have survived without effective body coverings. No textiles or woven fabrics have survived. but indirect evidence strongly suggests Neanderthals made and wore animal hide clothing. On many skeletons, especially skulls and front teeth, archaeologists found distinctive wear patterns, likely from gripping and pulling hides with their teeth during processing. Stone tools show microscopic use wear, indicating hide scraping, flesh removal, and surface softening. Some tools, especially scrapers, are shaped precisely for working raw animal skins. Beyond mechanical treatment, Neanderthals likely used natural biochemical methods. Biochemical traces suggest they used animal fat, marrow, and even brain matter, rich in oils and enzymes, to soften hides and make them water-resistant. There's also evidence they used smoke curing to dry and disinfect hides for longer preservation. A 2012 study comparing Pleistocene climate and modern hunter-gatherer adaptations found that to maintain body heat in Central European winters, Neanderthals needed to cover 80 to 90% of their bodies. The conclusion: even without woven textiles, they crafted effective leather garments, robust enough to survive where many other species perished. This wasn't accidental, it was survival engineering. Art 7. Family and community. Neanderthal society wasn't built around hunting alone. Archaeological evidence shows they formed organized family and community units where mutual care was crucial for survival. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, archaeologists discovered the remains of a Neanderthal adult named Shanidar I, who had suffered severe trauma: a fractured skull, blindness in one eye, a missing arm, and crippling arthritis. Yet he lived to old age, something impossible without help from others. A similar case was found at La Chapelle-aux-Saints, France. The skeleton of an elderly Neanderthal, missing many teeth and suffering from spinal degeneration, but buried with care. These findings challenge the idea of solitary survival. On the contrary, they prove that Neanderthals cared for their weak and elderly, even when they could no longer hunt or move independently. The elderly held functional roles in Neanderthal communities. They were not abandoned. They were repositories of knowledge on animal migration, tool-making techniques, seasonal water sources, and fire-making in cold, wet conditions. They were the guardians of collective memory. Though Neanderthals left no writing, oral tradition and behavioral imitation likely served as vital methods for passing down skills and values across generations. Family, in its most primal sense, was already in place. There were no marriages, no formal clans, but there was shared space, shared resources, shared responsibility, and shared memory. In a volatile climate, this small but cohesive social structure was key to their 300,000-year survival. Part 8. Emotional beings. For much of the 20th century, Neanderthals were portrayed as crude, emotionless creatures, governed by instinct, devoid of culture. But modern archaeology is rewriting that narrative. In Shanidar Cave, pollen traces were found around Neanderthal remains, suggesting the possibility of flower burials. Though some debate whether the pollen was natural or intentional, the burial ritual hypothesis remains widely supported. In Spanish caves like La Pasiega, Ardelis, and Maltravieso, abstract red pigment drawings, dots, lines, handprints were dated using uranium-thorium methods to at least 64,000 years ago, well before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. The artists could only have been Neanderthals. Other personal artifacts include necklaces made from animal teeth, eagle talons, and perforated shells, indicating jewelry-making behavior. These are clear signs of symbolic thinking, a foundation for complex emotions, imagination, and abstraction. Symbolic thought was not exclusive to Homo sapiens. Neanderthals could create imagery, assign meaning to objects, and may have developed early forms of memorialization or belief in death. From a cognitive evolution perspective, this places them alongside, not behind us. Part 9. Blood of Two Worlds. Around 60,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began migrating northward from Africa. When they reached the Middle East and Europe, the land was not empty. Neanderthals had already inhabited it for hundreds of thousands of years. The meeting of the two species did not leave evidence of large-scale war. Instead, modern genetic analysis reveals a different form of contact: genetic mixing. DNA from non-African modern humans, European, Asian, and indigenous American, contains 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. This means interbreeding occurred between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, producing hybrid offspring who survived and continued reproducing. These events were not rare. They happened frequently enough for Neanderthal DNA to persist in our modern genome. The remaining Neanderthal DNA affects various modern traits: immune system, skin and hair structure, inflammatory responses, and even predispositions to certain diseases like type 2 diabetes, lupus, and depression. The interbreeding was biologically real, confirmed by full genome sequencing in 2010. This was not just a genetic curiosity. It proved that the two species were close enough to produce viable offspring with lasting biological impact. It blurred the boundary between us and them. Part 10. A silent disappearance. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals vanished from the fossil record. No mass graves, no signs of genocide, no evidence of active war, just a gradual retreat into silence, group by group, cave by cave, region by region. The precise causes remain under investigation, but three major factors are widely considered. Climate change. Between 45,000 and 40,000 years ago, the Northern Hemisphere experienced abrupt, severe fluctuations, known as Heinrich events. Average temperatures dropped, ice sheets melted, ecosystems collapsed, large prey either migrated or went extinct, severely disrupting Neanderthal hunting strategies. Disease and immune weakness. Genetic data shows Neanderthals had low genetic diversity, limiting their adaptability to new diseases. When Homo sapiens arrived from Africa, they brought unfamiliar pathogens that may have caused unrecorded but deadly outbreaks. Ecological competition. Homo sapiens had more flexible migration, larger social groups, more diverse tools, and better knowledge transmission. In an unstable environment, these advantages could tip the scale in their favor, economically and reproductively. Neanderthals didn't disappear because they were weak. They endured nearly 300,000 years in brutal conditions. But when the pace of change outstripped their ability to adapt, a highly specialized species became vulnerable. Within a few millennia, they faded, without noise, without farewell. Part 11. A legacy beyond DNA. Neanderthal legacy is not limited to DNA sequences. Though roughly 1 to 2% of the modern non-African genome comes from them, their significance reaches far beyond biology. Genetically, Neanderthal DNA still affects our physiology, our inflammatory response, viral resistance, skin and hair properties, fat metabolism, and even neurological risks like anxiety or depression. For instance, TLR6, TLR1, and TLR10, Neanderthal-derived genes, boost immune responses but also raise allergy risk. But the behavioral legacy is harder to measure, yet no less vital. Planned tool use, multi-material processing, symbolic behaviors such as pigments and ornaments, role-based social organization, care for the sick and elderly, these were Neanderthal traits. They reflect a cultural capacity not vastly different from that of Homo sapiens. Human is not defined solely by genetics. It includes behavior, knowledge, and generational transmission. Neanderthals possessed all these, and many of their expressions still echo in modern behavior, social structures, and emotional reflexes. Neanderthals don't just live in our DNA. They live in how we act, connect, protect, and remember. Their legacy is not fossilized. It continues every day within us. Part 12. The face in the mirror. Today, when you look in the mirror, you don't see a Neanderthal. Your face is different. Higher forehead, distinct chin, a lighter build. But that doesn't mean they are gone from you. You carry fragments of their DNA, perhaps immune genes, skin traits, or silent sequences in non-coding regions. But more importantly, you carry a part of them in our collective evolutionary memory, in the way we live in groups, share, cooperate, tell stories, and care for others. Neanderthals were not a failed branch. They were a successful model, until the environment changed faster than they could adapt. That could happen to any species. The lesson from Neanderthals lies not in their extinction, but in why they survived for so long. Intelligence, community, and learning. They are gone from the earth, but they have never left history, because part of them remains, in our bodies, in our behaviors, and in our understanding. There is no absolute line between them and us. Neanderthals were human, and we are the next chapter they never got to write.